Welcome to Galaxy Brains.
An infinite amount of cash.
I'm your host, Alex Thorn.
The U.S. banking system is sound and resilient.
Bitcoin made a new all-time high.
If you're not long, you're short.
Satoshi's going to come on there, laugh hysterically, go quiet. All Bitcoin's going to be erased.
Bitcoin's the best crypto out there.
Bitcoin is going to zero.
Welcome back to Galaxy Brains. As always, I'm your host, Alex Thorn, head of firm-wide research at Galaxy. Have an interesting truncated episode. We've been running our Singapore tapes episodes this week, so I don't have a guest for this episode, but of course I would not deprive you of the opportunity to have a little bit of an extended conversation with Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading about markets, about the election. Actually, we were getting a little philosophical about wealth inequality and how government is structured. I think you'll enjoy it. Before we get to that, I need to remind you to please refer to the link to the disclaimer in the podcast notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Let's hop right into it. Let's go now to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading. As always, Beimnet, welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
It's the first time I've seen you in the office in several weeks. It's good to see you. And it's been a pretty exciting time in the market as far as I can tell. I mean, Bitcoin's looking pretty sturdy, although we're pulled back a bit from where we were, but it doesn't feel like it wants to go much lower. What's your sort of take on are we a ball, what is a beach ball underwater, people say?
You could say that. I think the dynamics for the next, 5 to 6 weeks are entirely dependent on the election outcome.
Yeah.
And so there's a pool of capital that is going to speculate on the election outcome before the election. And then there's a ton more capital that's likely going to make a ton of allocation decisions after the election result is known. And so I think it's pretty clear to me that in a Trump presidency or a Trump victory, crypto should outperform and will be a popular trade for folks that have yet to allocate to the space, that are looking to, to potentially allocate. And so I think the election's sort of the biggest kind of catalyst that's in the market. And in terms of what price action is going to do leading in, you'd think that you have to start pricing in that distribution a little bit better, in the sense that where's Bitcoin go on a Trump presidency? It could break through all-time highs, and then trade up to somewhere inside of 100K. And so if you're putting a 53% probability on, let's say, Bitcoin going to 90K, and under a Kamala presidency, the low has been, let's say, 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it gets there because, from what we've heard from the Harris campaign, they are going to be better on crypto as an issue than the existing administration.
And we just sent a note to our clients and counterparties where I analyzed every major crypto issue, and it's obvious that Trump is more supportive than the Harris campaign. But I think on every issue except two, we found some evidence either from their public statements, scant though they've been, or the intelligence about the personnel she has around her, or conversations that have been reported from these meetings between donors and the campaign, that she's on almost all the issues, she's at least slightly better than Biden. So to me, longer term, for Bitcoin in particular, it should be positive, frankly, either way. Although it's the way I'm thinking of it is neutral to slightly positive if Kamala wins, to possibly explosively positive if Trump wins.
So just pricing in those outcomes,
Yeah.
right? Like, you get to an expected value of Bitcoin that's higher than where we are now. And I think folks are going to be more inclined to price that sort of set of outcomes as you get much closer to the election. So I think, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, you'll probably have a steady grind higher in BTC as you kind of just are forced to price that in, because realistically, there's not too much else that's significant.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where my head's at. I think in terms of, the macro backdrop, again, I think a Trump presidency is probably constructive for equities from a regulatory standpoint, from a tax policy standpoint, uh, and so I think, and he's also going to be inclined to kind of pressure the Fed to uh, maintain less restrictive monetary policy, and so I do think the macro backdrop is it's going to remain supportive, in either administration. And we can touch on the macro a bit more, but the other sort of big thing has been kind of the Chinese stimulus that you've had over the past couple
Yeah.
of weeks. The market was expecting a little bit more of a fiscal push to come out of the press conference that we had yesterday. We didn't get it. Hang Seng finished down a ton.
Yeah.
So the Chinese equities are off a little bit. But ultimately, I do think that they are going to be forced into doing massive fiscal stimulus in conjunction with their monetary stimulus. And then looking elsewhere across the world, Europe is showing signs of weakness in terms of, industrial production, inflation figures, et cetera. So, Europe's on an easing path. Canada's on an easing path. New Zealand's on an easing path. Switzerland, some of the Scandies, like there's just such a convergence of looser monetary policy that's happening. And you're probably likely going to get some end to QT at some point in the U.S. And so there's going to be a lot of factors that are supportive of risk assets. And number one rule in markets is don't fight the central banks.
Yep.
And so I think in that environment, you should see Bitcoin trade well. And so, I'm reasonably constructive on Bitcoin on a go-forward basis. High level, though, I think that the only thing you should be trading for the next 6 weeks is really the election. And, I think some of the polling data recently has been much more in favor of Trump, particularly.
You mean like very recent polls?
The very recent polls and the prediction market stuff. And so, I think on Polymarket, you're talking about Trump being
It's like 53-47 or something.
exactly.
Yeah.
And Pennsylvania's widened out even further post, the rally that he did with Elon Musk
Right.
over the weekend as well. And so we're really starting to see some momentum from the Trump campaign. But, you essentially had, he had an awful debate performance.
Awful August, awful
And-
debate in early September. Right? I
But,
mean, Kamala was running that big wave out of the
Yes,
convention
exactly,
and stuff. And,
exactly. And
but
now
yeah, I
we-
think you're right. I mean, she also just this week has performed quite poorly in several interviews. One on CBS was actually like pretty surprising. CBS kind of like hit her pretty hard. Basically said that her nomination is undemocratic is basically what the interviewer was implying because, of course,
That's tough to argue with.
I
mean,
know
there
it was.
was
She didn't argue with it great, but I agree. I don't fault her. I'm not sure how she answers that question.
Yeah.
But
Given the
Tim Wall's also
circumstances,
hasn't done that great in some interviews.
I mean, the Tiananmen Square question.
Yeah, the VP debate last week though, I thought they were both good. I mean, in the end, I think JD Vance performed better, but Waltz came off as pretty good. I mean, the joke, I don't know if you saw the SNL sketch from this past weekend, but it was like they were basically like about to ask each other out on a date because they were so friendly with each other.
They were.
They were so friendly.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, I agree though. The election, we've been saying this for quite a while. It's hard to see past the election when it comes to investing right now.
Yeah.
But also, like, I just discount like poll. I just can't look at the polls and the horse race too closely. Like, I have to assume this comes down.
It's still around a coin flip.
Yeah.
And we've been shocked by election outcomes this year. In Europe, with the far right parties and stuff. Some of the Asian elections, Japan,
in 2016,
Mexico earlier this year as well. Right. And so, market participants, should prepare for either outcome.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we were trying to get across, though, in this research note that we sent was that I don't believe, the more we've looked into this and talked to people, that it is catastrophic for crypto if Trump doesn't win. I don't believe that at all. I do think that the U.S. regulatory environment is tight for crypto. It's really not great. But that Harris administration is likely to be just at a minute marginally better, on the margin, slightly better than Biden. So, that should be okay, right? I mean, it's sort of like it's the same as now, which isn't good.
Yeah.
But what if it was the same, just slightly better than now?
Yeah, well,
That's an improvement.
it's an improvement. But at the end of the
Some
day,
people are going to
like
say that I'm splitting
markets,
hairs here.
markets need catalysts.
Yeah.
Really. And, say that you do get the Kamala administration, like, what will the market have to look forward to on a go forward basis?
Yeah,
A moderate easing of regulatory pressures.
Yeah, it's not
like
much.
that's not gonna get people to be like, I gotta buy more crypto assets.
Yeah, you're right. That's a
Right.
great point.
And so that's kind of where I'm like, you do have some downside risk with the Kamala stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you asked me 6 months ago or like a year ago, like what is the average investor meant to do going into the election? Not thinking about it too hard, I'd tell you the cynic in me says they're going to pump risk assets going into the election because that people vote with their wallets.
Yep.
And Dems and the establishment
They want to they probably like cut some taxes, give away some free money, like whatever.
employ more people in the government job sector, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, wasn't that
the
jobs
revision
report?
in the non-farm payrolls was very heavily skewed towards
It was like 90% federal government
jobs. Yeah,
It's not great.
Yeah, and
But right, okay.
I don't want to read too much into it. I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics was just doing their jobs, and they're reporting figures as they see them. But again, if you asked me a year ago, the cynic in me would tell you that risk assets will go into the election at the dead highs. And that could just be because risk assets generally trend higher, monetary debasement, stock buybacks,
Even like
whatever.
seasonality, the fall's usually
Seasonality,
good. Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. But that's exactly where we're kind of at right now, particularly in terms of the U.S. equity market, where, you look at some of the big themes that you've had. You have some of the popular AI names trading really well right now. S&P's within spitting distance of all-time highs again. Made fresh highs a couple weeks ago.
Right.
And so, people aren't feeling like that much poorer going into the probably there's some wealth effect associated with that.
Right.
Which should generally help folks at the polls. Being like, do I want change or do I not want?
Or wait a
change?
second, isn't my 401k at all-time highs? Right. Like,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
But
that doesn't feel like the vibes, though. I think partly because the election has been so tiring, like and toxic. I mean, frankly,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
You had one president who was
Name calling and
one president who's a name caller. The other one had to leave the race.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's been a lot of to deal with. You've got these hurricanes, which are horrible and devastating. You've got the geopolitics and the crises in the Middle East have been painful and horrible. And it's just like I feel like the news has been like a nonstop, barrage of things that are just tough to handle for people. And I feel like people are tired. We're still a month away. We're basically about just under a month away from the election.
Yes.
I guess it's always like this. I'm thinking back. They're all the elections are always
clickbait. People will click on these stories more than like, job market's fine.
Yeah, everyone's feeling happy.
Yeah.
This is when you got to start like reading The Onion, Local man takes subway to work. I'm like, that's what I like to hear.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, but there is a lot of concerning things happening. I mean, this hurricane.
Right. You got Helene in western North Carolina and also parts of Georgia and South Carolina and Tennessee. This new hurricane, I think
Category
probably
5.
by the time this comes out, will have hit Florida.
Yeah.
It's like the 4th strongest winds ever recorded in a hurricane or something, I read.
I mean, there was the guy, the NBC meteorologist, that was crying about it.
I know. It's serious. It's serious. But this stuff also affects the economy. It also affects the mood. It's also it by the way, it obviously affects people's lives.
It does.
And
again, though, he's
but like 2 in a row.
I know, back to back.
Yeah, that's pretty harsh.
It's harsh, especially for
I mean, that whole area, that's among the largest economies in the country as well.
Yeah, you got over 20 million plus people that live in Florida.
I can't recall a presidential election that really will have happened while we were recovering from like a major natural disaster. I don't recall if there was. It's pretty wild though. Because you got everybody's flying in the helicopter, doing the press conferences, like wearing the like flight jackets and stuff, like doing all the politician thing.
I mean, did you see the bit Ron DeSantis was on TV
No,
the other
I saw
day?
him talking.
He's like, Kamala has nothing to do with the hurricane relief efforts and planning.
He
blah,
claimed
blah,
that
blah.
she's making it political. I'm not sure. Maybe she is. Probably everyone is.
But realistically, does the vice president have anything to do with this crisis management?
Well, I think one of the
limited.
I don't know if it's a dirty secret. I think it's actually well known, but the vice president constitutionally has basically zero responsibilities. They're a
tiebreaker in the Senate.
Tiebreaker in the Senate, and they're a warm body should the president have to leave office or and that's true. I think it was I don't know about the Harris and Biden relationship, but Biden as Obama's VP was pretty famously, people said, historians and whomever, was one of the most active vice presidents, that they really were. They became close friends,
Uncle
and
Joe.
he was a good advisor. But I think normally you never even see him. I mean, I guess it's hard to say Dick Cheney. It's hard not to say Dick Cheney might have been the most powerful vice president. That's true. All right. Well, so you're looking at the election. You're waiting. Are you following it like every day? Is that what you?
Well, I've got
to do market. You got Polymarket open and
no. So there's a great Bloomberg page that aggregates the Polymarket and some of the other prediction markets, and then there's some polls that come out every day. It used to be. I remember when Trump was initially running, that ABC would have a poll that was out like once a week or something. And you'd literally see dollar MEX move based on where the poll results came out, because he wanted to build the wall at the time. And so it was like, oh, Trump's polling better. We got to set dollar MEX higher.
Yeah.
And then vice versa.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the corration at that period, it was tight.
Yeah.
It's tight because that's the only thing that mattered at that time. And so I would say now there's not anything that's like
that obvious.
Yeah. But like at the end of the day, like what makes America so special, it's the dynamism in the economy. And regardless of who's the president, they're not going to destroy Silicon Valley, right? They're not going to destroy the system of checks and balances. They're not going to destroy the free market economy that has helped this nation like thrive. And so most of the time you're supposed to think that regardless of the administration or the party that's in office, the economy is not going to really be that responsive to either party, at least the stock market.
You're right. That should be true.
And that it has been true.
Yeah.
You could argue that, certain ones have been better than others, but high level, like.
Well, yeah, if you go back and look at the chart of the S&P and you click all the way time back, it's just up only forever.
Up only.
Yeah.
Regardless of who's president. Yeah. And so, that's kind of, as a U.S. equity investor, like you might not care that much, especially if you're thinking on bigger time
That's
frames.
a refreshing take, because I think people get so caught up in the horse race and the competition. America feels so divided over this issue, over many issues, right?
I mean, there's some things though that I'm like very concerned about on the left, like the taxation of unrealized capital gains.
Something like that would absolutely destroy Silicon Valley, would it not?
It would be insane.
Right, you can't run a startup. You get an uplift valuation as a founder, but you
don't
you don't actually have that money.
You don't.
It's not a liquid equity. You'd be forced to divest from your company just to pay the tax off.
I know.
On an unrealized. So yes, there are some, but I agree. But that's also really very unlikely, right? I mean, that's like such an insane policy. You couldn't. That would break the economy.
It just like the fact that it's even being floated though is concerning.
That's true.
Right. Like because you'd want these types of like real structural policy changes to be vetted, right? And I don't know.
I mean, I saw a video, one of these like, vloggers or, that's very common now when they go around asking people stuff. on a college campus. I saw this video where they many of the students, they said, "Are you more capitalist or socialist?" Most said socialist, and that is a concerning thing to me.
Well, I disagree in the entirety because, like,
Okay.
the U.S. is socialist. Like, where do you think like 2/3 of the government budget is spent?
That's
Right?
true.
It's
Social
Social
services.
Security,
Yeah.
Medicare,
Yeah.
and and other social services.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like that's a healthy amount of the budget that
True,
goes towards
true.
and
But doesn't the fact that-
whether it was Trump or whether it was Biden, stimulus checks still went out during COVID.
True, but
to
doesn't
people.
doesn't the fact that people are self-identifying that way, isn't that what sort of helps to it aids in that the environment that leads to something like a tax on unrealized gains being even proposed, isn't it? Isn't it? There's a material degrading in the belief in the American capitalist system. Do you not agree?
I mean, I think what you're highlighting is just the fact that folks have been disillusioned in terms of, achieving the American dream, right? I read a post yesterday that said the American dream now costs about $4.4 million, right? That's home ownership,
college, kids, families.
So the numbers were around like $900,000 for home ownership, raising two kids, about another $900,000. Retirement, which is I think $1.6 million. Your funeral, which is about $8,000. Vehicles,
Yep.
automotives, overtime, etc. That's a couple $100,000 as well. But the numbers got to like about $4.4 million
That seems
for
pretty
the
high.
American dream. And so tell me, like, what portion of America or portion of folks that are in the early side of their careers actually feels like that American dream is attainable, right? The numbers don't add up in terms of average wages out of college, wage growth, et cetera. Like if you don't already own
housing
assets,
costs.
home costs,
Yeah.
et cetera. And so that's where the real disillusionment is right now, and why you're probably seeing more folks being
Yep.
like, socialism might be the answer, universal basic income, et cetera, to kind of even the playing field. Because right now, a lot of the stuff that you would have hoped was attainable for a lot more people isn't. And if we're being honest, neither administration is really going to fix that.
These are longer-term structural issues, right?
Correct. Well, you print a bunch of money and
It helps asset owners.
Yeah. Right? And then it's just...
I mean, how much were the stimulus checks actually in total? Like two grand or
No,
$1,500?
I think it added up to over $3,000.
They really did.
Yeah,
those
but
mad
then
lads. They sent everyone
they
$3K,
sent three checks of like over $1,000 each.
and they didn't even send them. They just direct deposited them into your
yes,
tax
correct
bank account.
And then on top of that, you had the PPP loans,
Yeah.
right? The student loan forgiveness,
But,
and,
like, you're looking at-
pausing of student loans.
I mean, that stuff is meaningful,
Well,
but the
socialist.
stimmy
Yeah.
is something. Those stimmies, as they were called at the time, humorously, but it doesn't really amount to the same thing as an asset owner's values appreciating dramatically when you print money.
Yeah,
couple K,
just look
not
at
bad
like,
to
the
help,
NASDAQ
but-
performance in
Yeah.
2021 and from the depths of COVID, et cetera, or how much home prices have appreciated, since COVID, et cetera. It's insane. And then you get these structural advantages. It's like, okay, wait, all the people that own mortgages at 3% or lower, they're never going to sell their homes, and their rental IRR is going to be huge. So they're just going to keep those homes, and the folks that are renters now, with mortgage rates so high, they can't,
Yep.
and then it's like, the asset owners have such a big advantage already.
Yep.
Like, how are you really going to compete with them? It's brutal.
It is.
But that speaks to like basically like wealth inequality.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's right.
And it's like the haves and the have-nots, right? Like, how are you ever really going to bridge that gap? You're not, unless you have like a very radical change in like how the government is structured and taxation policy, and
You need a more dynamic, startup-driven, and economy where people can build and create things more easily, theoretically, is a capitalist response to that question. Obviously,
Yeah,
parts of the
the
left
problem
think
is the
it's
capitalism just leads to further
centralization and stuff too.
Yes,
Yeah, well,
exactly.
well, it depends. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that a more libertarian economy, where actually the like anti-monopoly regulator, like I guess it would be the FTC. No, the is that right? The Federal Trade
Federal
Commission.
Trade depends.
That
Yeah,
would
yeah.
theoretically, in a sort of like a libertarian capitalist utopia, one outcome could be where the only big or the biggest government office is purely the anti-monopoly part of because it helps to create an economy of many smaller dynamic companies rather than several giant conglomerates. Like anyway,
Yeah, but
that's pretty theoretical, to be clear. Very
But
theoretical
so
idea.
I mean, here's the thing. Okay, so these two companies can't merge, or this big company has to be like 6 different separate
Right.
small companies. The people that actually own the underlying equity of the 6 underlying are still going to be the people
That's
with
right.
the most amount of wealth.
That's right.
And high level, one of the things that I've always disagreed with in terms of, I do agree that fix the money, fix the world sort of philosophy
Bitcoin, you
with
mean, yeah.
Bitcoin. There's a lot of positive externalities to come from moving more folks onto Bitcoin and decentralized money, especially in emerging markets. However, like there's still going to be a component where it's like a ton of wealthy folks
Oh
will
yeah,
own Bitcoin.
it's gonna be a power law probably forever. Like you see power laws across nature. Like it's not. Yeah, the idea. This is, I think. I mean, this is why like a forced, equity, like a straight up communist society, is so disruptive because like everything in nature, like a gradient emerges, right? And
Yeah.
yes, Bitcoin is not going to magically help make poor people not poor, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
if you if you own and hold Bitcoin, you should know that there's no central bank that can debase the value of your coins.
Correct.
But that's, maybe about it, theoretically. I agree. The externalities are interesting. If you listen to some of the more, you know, Bitcoin maximalist lines of thought about a deflationary currency having downstream effects, right? Like literally, like people will build things with a more long-term vision, right? You're not going to trade your Bitcoin for a house made out of vinyl siding, but you might trade it for one made out of stone, for example, right?
Yeah.
And that like this could play out across. But yes, even that story doesn't necessarily mean that wealth inequality is no longer a problem at all.
Yeah.
This has been good, my friend. Thank you for this extended, more episode of musings. And thanks for coming on Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of Galaxy Brains. Thank you to our friend Beimnet Abebe from Galaxy Trading, and we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening to Galaxy Brains, the weekly podcast from Galaxy Research. If you enjoy the show, please like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To follow Galaxy Research, sign up for our weekly newsletter at gdr.email, read our content at galaxy.com/research, and follow us on Twitter at GLXY Research. See you next week.